Welcome everybody to the Q&A live stream. I'm Justin Swan, director of the Cascade Community Foundation. Today, we're talking about education and not the stuff that's gonna get you all riled up, running into your next PTA meeting or school board meeting with pitchforks. We're talking about the modern classroom. We're gonna be sharing with you some insightful conversations that we've had with local educators from a big public school, from a small Christian school, homeschool parents. We've got input from librarians, and we're gonna be even sharing an exclusive first interview with a wonderfully innovative disruptor in the education space called the Mavin Project. I'm really excited to share that with you. Before I move on, please take a moment, subscribe and like to our page, to our channel, to this video. Get it out there to as many educators as you can. My partner in crime today in the studio here at the Community Media Center in Grand Rapids West Side is none other than Lance Werner, the director of Kent District Library, who of course is our presenting sponsor for this two-part Q&A live stream special. Well, welcome Lance. We had a chance to talk before this all started, and it just seems to me like education is on the move.
Oh, absolutely. Education is certainly on the move. I think there's finally a recognition that there's a need to kind of mold educational offerings around the student versus having the students mold themselves around what's available for educational offerings. So I think it's an extraordinary time in education, and I feel like I have a lot of hope that we're going to be very successful because there's this recognition.
Yeah, so we're really excited to have you here. We're going to head now and show you the clips that we took with Dan Beam, Superintendent of Forest Hills Public Schools.
For decades, the experience at elementary school, pick a grade level, kindergarten through sixth grade is a common way to look at elementary school, has been really about amassing the building blocks of learning how to read, learning the language of mathematics, communication, how we organize ourselves as people in social studies, some basic elements of science, scientific method. And then high school has been too much really about an intellectual obstacle course, where the purpose of high school long ago was to simply sort out the small percentage of people who were going to go on to additional formal learning after high school. The vast majority of people would go into the workforce after graduation. And that can still be a pathway, but the problem is high schools were really designed to sort and select who would go to which pathway. Instead, what we see that high school can be, and when we think about it, it's 4,400 hours of student learning that's coming in there, rather than the vast majority of that time being about who can run this obstacle course the fastest and with the fewest errors. It really needs to be more about students spending time practicing the things that adults do. Yeah. Just as we can give students a head start with a musical instrument, back to the piano, and sort of getting some time on the instrument, on the craft, we want to have high school be a springboard to the same types of things. And we brought 28 students together, one from each of those high schools, some in a focus group activity, but then also some one-on-one interviews. And it was in the one-on-one interview that we found something just astounding. We asked, one of the questions was, describe high school in one word. So we had 28 responses, 28 one-word responses. They didn't hear each other's responses. 19 of the 28 responses were the exact same one word: boring. So when we think of this 4,400 hours and the potential that is there bringing students together in a dynamic learning space, and when the vast majority of them are reporting the same experience, boring, we know we have to do something different.
Yep.
It's changing that high school experience from one of simply navigating this obstacle course to one where we're really opening up all the things that are possible in students' lives as they peer over the horizon into their own future. We used to have this experience, I love a song, and so I'd have to buy the whole album, or a cassette tape or 8-track, depending on your generation, how old you were, even a CD. Now we've got iTunes, and so we can just get that song. what we've got in education are these just chapters and chapters of standards that we have, and we've taught these standards in courses. So Algebra 1 has 91 standards in it. If I already know 22% of those 91 standards, there's no way for me to sort of, in the old model, to just advance to where my new learning needs to be. There's no way to sort of fast forward on the CD just to the song that I like or that I need. So what we need is sort of an iTunifications of education, where we can disaggregate those standards, what it is students need to learn and be able to do. And we can also form our own custom playlist. We can group them together in different ways. When you walk into the modern classroom, it's going to have a buzz to it. It's going to be more like I guess, a dynamic workspace where there's some students working on experiments, there's some students who are working together to communicate and write up something that they've discovered or learned. There's going to be students who are looking to connect with the outside world, whether that is through technology or actually planning experiences where they're going out to places in the community. There's students at all different stages on this, because the other thing that we know just intrinsically as human beings is that one size doesn't fit all, and we don't all hit these milestones at the same time. The metaphor of the past for K-12 education was mass production. Students were on this assembly line. We've all heard this metaphor before many times, and we're just going through the assembly line, and people are sort of attaching a skill or a knowledge base here or there as we go along. And the metaphor really for the future really needs to be mass customization. We're in a dynamic phase right now, which is exciting, but at times can also be somewhat daunting to people as well. But as we look at children, children love to learn. You can look at a 3-year-old and they don't need to be told to start learning. It's innately in us as human beings. And we want to capture that innate joy of learning even when we go to school, kindergarten through 12th grade and beyond. You know, when I was a young lad, I was in Cub Scouts for a little while, and we had this manual. We had this book that all of us got, and we could, the idea was we were going to master all of this by the end of our year in Cub Scouts together, but we could pick and choose different things and kind of take our own sequence and order through this book. And I also knew what was expected. I knew that in order to get this badge, I needed to tie a knot in a certain way, and I could practice it. I could get help from my den mother in doing that. And then when I was ready, I could go and say, look, I'm ready to show you I can do this thing. Mm-hmm. The modern classroom is in a similar way, that students understand not these standards that it's hard for anyone to get their head around, but instead, what are the knowledge bases I need to know? What are the skill sets that I need to be able to demonstrate that I'm proficient in these skills? And then come forward, get help and support for doing that, not only from teacher, but from other people in our community, and then be able to come forward and show how I can do these things. And we're going to learn how to practice all these things with real life experiences that students are having. So that's how I see the modern classroom. Much more dynamic, a lot less of what we call death row seating. Death row seating is that classroom arrangement where you've got a bunch of these sled desks that are 80 pounds and the teacher's at the front. That communicates that we're only going to be doing a certain set of activities in this space. And we need to, in many ways, sort of blow up that notion and create a laboratory that has the ability to mimic the spaces that adults are in a variety of different settings. I think what COVID's done is shown us that there is incredible capacity for adaptability on the part of adults and students as well. It's also reaffirmed for us that one size doesn't fit all, that there is a need to create a dynamic system that is has the capability to align to student needs, and understanding that as human beings we have different ways of learning. There are different things that 15-year-olds have already learned that other 15-year-olds haven't had the ability to learn, and how do we create a system that is responsive to the diversity of those needs?
Well, we're back. We just heard from Dan Beam, Forest Hills Public Schools. Lance, he had some tremendous things to say. One of the things that really took me, and I want to get your opinion on this, and really the opinion of not just the library system, but also as somebody who is very close to educators. But one thing he's talking about a lot is trying to get curriculum to mimic adult behavior, whether it's in the workforce, what it is, and away from that kind of static, structured, traditional, intellectual obstacle course.
Oh, absolutely. And I couldn't agree with what he said more, to be honest with you, Justin. I really feel like Dan really understands that education has to evolve just like everything else. And there's, like I said before, there's really a recognition now that we need to prepare these students to be successful in the adult world. And the way to do that is to break out of that sort of traditional shell and get them in environments that kind of mimic that adult world more. I really feel like that there's a lot of merit to what he said, and I agree with it completely.
Yeah, when I sat down with him, he started to go on we asked 19 out of 28 high school students to describe their high school experience in one word. My response was boring, and he was like, nailed it. That's 70% of students describing current high school as boring. How did you take that?
Well, I agree with it. And honestly, I don't really see, much of a change from when I went to school 10,000 years ago with dinosaurs. From what is occurring in a lot of schools today. It's this sort of adherence to traditional instruction that I think is really kind of killing education. And so I think it's really important to be dynamic and to recognize that the needs of the student, the needs of the family, and the needs of the businesses and the community are different now, and we need to rise up and meet those needs.
Yeah, and you're going to remember this just like I remembered this, but this idea of death row seating. I mean, he's talking about 80-pound sleds and death row seating. I was really amazed that he was bold as a superintendent of a very prominent school district in Grand Rapids, Michigan.
Yes.
I was totally amazed that he was willing to just put that out there, like, we're going to change these spaces.
Yeah, I think it was important that he said that. I think it takes a lot of courage to say that, and I think that's what needs to happen. And I think if you look at other institutions in the county like the Innovation High, I mean, they get that. That's where he's headed. Forest Hills School District is a phenomenal school district. Dan does a great job. And it does my heart well to see him lead. And I think we definitely need to get away from that sort of very rigorous traditional setup because, again, everybody's different.
Yeah, here's a word for viewers at home: itunification. Blown away by this because, one, it's going to go viral, but two, he really drew this extremely well, where we're talking about less about that mass production style of education and more into this, like mass consumption and the ability to customize a learning critiqued right down to the child, and putting together this curriculum-based playlist around itunification, I thought was brilliant.
I did as well, and it really goes to the point again that everybody's an individual, everybody's needs are different, everybody learns differently. The more we can customize an educational experience, the better off the student's going to be. Everybody learns at their own pace. They learn differently. We have visual learners and we have auditory learners. We have people that need repetition. Everybody's all over the place. I think the more that we can dial it in to the individual student, the better off we're all going to be.
Yeah, and we're going to hear more about the actual physical space when we get to Holly Goulet from KDL.
Absolutely.
But he starts talking about it too, Dan does, where he's talking about how just the subliminal subconscious weighs in on you when you walk into a learning space and it's not set up right, and how they're dedicated to changing those spaces. I thought we have an opportunity there.
I totally agree. There is that sort of mental component. If you walk into a very set, rigorous environment, I mean, it's going to have an impression on the student, particularly a very young student. And the high school students walking, oh, here it is again, boring. Right, I really feel like we need to be more dynamic, and I think it's clear that he recognizes that. And again, hats off to Dan.
Yeah. So all in all, what is your take on a public school? And I know this is it's a small sample size. We talked to one superintendent here, but when viewers at home are talking about how they want their 3-year-old to get into school, whether it's parochial and private, which we'll talk to, homeschooling, all these different variables, what's your level 1 to 10 how you're feeling like at least Forest Hills Public Schools is doing?
Well, in Forest Hills, I would give them 8 to 10, somewhere in there. I think they do a phenomenal job there. Unfortunately, I mean, not every public school system's the same, but I think that as long as there's leaders like Forest Hills and some of the other school districts in the area that are willing to kind of buck the trend, to recognize the need for individualism, I have hope.
Yeah, so bucking the trend is certainly what we're going to be talking about next. With Naik. He is the developer of the Mavin project, a software assessment tool that looks to disrupt education in a really unique way. Let's go to my interview with Sai.
The modern classroom is interactive, it's equitable, it's accessible, it's sustainable, it's fair, it's prosperous, it's transparent, and it's opportunity. We have now created a system that allows us to create a different assessment than a standardized test. That's it. When you talk to educators who really understand it, the importance of CTE and CBE and project or problem-based, they know exactly what you're saying. They'll say, show me how. We created a partnership, a collaboration that we call the Mavin Project, and working together with educators, with the business community. So what is that root cause that these amazingly talented people who live in this region, we should have just a stock full of talent. And what we started to really understand is that these standardized tests people take, starting in very young ages, 2nd grade, 3rd grade, those are paradigms that worked way back when. Again, when you didn't have computers, you didn't have internet, you had to have an assessment to make sure people were learning things. But how in this day and age, when you have TikTok and Facebook and ways to post where you are in the world and what you're doing every day and what you're eating every day, is the only way we can measure what people can do by sitting and taking a bubble test. If maybe I have a reading or literacy problem, it doesn't mean I can't measure, doesn't mean I can't build something, I can't weld, I can't go into additive manufacturing. Why? Because I have a disability. Why? Because I use sign language, right? That doesn't mean I don't have employment opportunities. I should have a ton. But we don't have a system right now, or if I'm an immigrant and I just came to this country, maybe English is my first language. That doesn't mean I can't do computer science or engineering, or I can't even speak my native language. I have no grammar problems, but we have no way to capture that and assess that. And the way we've been doing it has caused too many countless people to fall through the cracks. Now, tests may work for some people. I'm not saying that it's bad across the board. I'm just saying that we can do better. And we have to do better as a business owner, as community leaders. We have to do better. And we have to address this head on. We can't keep saying, does education work? Does a higher degree work? We can't say that. So we have to figure out a better system, because there's a role for everything. K-12 education, good public education, public libraries, associate's degrees, 4-year degrees. There's a role for everything. We don't need to blow it up. We just need to correct it. And if you go all the way back through history, before it was apprenticeships, right? I learned through apprenticeship, which means that somebody who knew it would watch me do it, whether it be, a welder or, a pipe fitter. And then we kind of got into this K-12-esque system where we started to measure, and then we started moving towards source test. How do we kind of go back to that? What could you do? And how can we actually use things like artificial intelligence to say, I know, Justin, you did it, or Sai, I know you did that, and you did a really good job, or you need to fix this. Because today kids learn from YouTube, they learn from Google, and they take the feedback from there. So how do we have that cleansed data there? And that's what we see, and we think that's going to just, again, unlock more equity, more access, and that's going to have a trickle-down effect to businesses like ours, and I think so many other business owners in so many industries, and hopefully move the state in a better position to get the upper hand. The system's going to get more complex. It's going to actually start being you'll be able to talk to the system, tell it your problems. It'll be able to help advise counselors, teachers, parents on social resources available to you. We'll start being able to have better detections to hopefully put a better safety net around people. If you are an adult, we'll be able to say, here's ways you can earn more money. If you lost your job, we're going to actually understand your income So you have to worry about your house going or your rent going. What we're trying to build is a digital public administration tool in many ways. This is a project. I would say it's not a product. The product drives it. And so I'd love to see how it does that, mother, and does that help your child or not? And if it doesn't, we're going to learn from it. Again, the great thing about design thinking, systems thinking, fail fast, which is what this region invested so much in, in 2011, 2012, making an entrepreneurial ecosystem. And it was all about fail fast, right? It was about how do we tackle these big social challenges as a region. I have seen AI and automation make lives of employers and employees so much better. I mean, think about what we're doing here, recording this video, and you have great editing software, right? Compared to what was. But yet, education, these poor folks, I was like, wow, they have tools, but the tools haven't made people's life easier. It's just been storing data. And so when we see the classroom in the future, the teacher is more of a facilitator. But it doesn't mean the teacher's gone. It means that the principal's still there, the teacher's there, the kids are still going to school every day, whether it's physical or remote. But the teacher's still working with them as they're going through these modules. The teacher gets the AI feedback like the student does too. Because what happens is when it gets the students frustrated, the teacher has to be there to work and coach them through it. But now what we're measuring the teacher on is not, well, we're going to take the performance of your students based on how they do on the standardized test. We're instead saying, if you can help your student finish that deliverable successfully, and you can't do it for them because AI can detect who's doing it, then that's how you get rewarded, and that's how the students can get rewarded. And I think that's a more fair and equitable situation for everybody in the ecosystem, and that will lead to better outcomes. You should want your schools being rated on what your kid's talent really is, and not on a 2-hour exam. And you should want your staff, your teachers, and your counselors. First of all, we should give them a better workload reduction, right? They're already overworked to begin with, right? And so this will hopefully manage the workload and make it more reasonable, especially with the COVID pandemic. Poor counselors have been overly swamped. You talked about mental health issues. I mean, it's just exacerbated, right? It's not going away. So it should make your life easier for a teacher and a counselor. You should better exhibit the talent of your teachers and counselors in helping your students learn, which they're doing today really well. Just the 2-hour test doesn't really grab that. It should inspire your students to know, I had a passion for doing this, and instead of telling me yes or no, because I made a mistake, but that's okay. The system told me how to fix it, and I kept working with my teacher, and I fixed it, and I was able to accomplish it, because that's what matters in life. Not how fast you go, but how far you go. And so I think it'll lead to better outputs and outcomes. Because what I always say is, I think people are competent. I think they're competent, way more competent than they realize. I think they lack confidence. And if people are our most important asset, and I truly believe that, people are the most important assets. So employees, humans are the most important thing. They can either appreciate or depreciate in value. And I believe that the system today we have depreciates our talent, and I'm hoping with this now we're going to be appreciating it, right? You made a mistake, here's how to fix it. That means you did it. Your value went up. Yeah. But there's too many people who tell me I had bad grades in school, or you don't want to see my test scores, right?
And they may equate that to, I'm not smart.
Yes, and this is the problem. And they might give up on their passion, or they might undervalue themselves, or get underpay. And there's something inherently wrong with that, right? And I don't know how anybody who can sit there and say we just have to let this problem go. We have to tackle it. This gives your child a better chance not only of succeeding, but aligning to industry needs. Because even though they master that test, it doesn't mean they're going to be a great developer, a great artist, a great musician. Doesn't mean they'll be a great scientist. Doesn't mean that just because they pass that. What's the correlation? Whereas this, when they find their passion and their friends think they're good at it and they think of the good and they understand how much earnings they can make, that means it's going to help them find their career faster, take the right college courses, because now they got to dabble in different things and understand, so this is why I get this degree, or this is how this major goes there. Well, I really like this profession, but it only pays this much, so do I need a 4-year degree or a 2-year degree? Because if I get a 4-year degree, I like this profession, but I might be able to pay back those bills fast enough. So this system's going to help, and it takes all those variables into account. Yeah. And so that's how this system works. It actually progressively understands then what pathway you like. As you get to high school, to community college, to 4-year degree, it actually is now actually doing the job function of that employer. So when the employer is hiring now, they're not looking at your race, your ethnicity, or your gender. They're looking at, can you do my work? The fairest form of equal employment opportunity. And that's why it was part of our HR strategy to build this platform. We just don't want to say we're an EEO employer. We said I'm a head of HR. We said we want to be an equal opportunity and really mean it. And that's why we built the system and work in this collaboration. Because we think now by doing what we're doing, we always say EEO doesn't begin when you're looking for a job. It begins when you're born and what community you're in. But we think this is actually bridging that equitable gap, especially hopefully for, like I said, as a minority-owned business, and we are, and I'm proud of that. It wasn't to say, well, that's going to enrich you, Cy, or your business and your efforts, right? It was meant to build a bridge to people who are like me, and my dad immigrated to this country, other immigrants, to say, here's how we're going to build a bbridge to help you out, whoever you are, ethnicity, race, orientation, doesn't matter. It's building a bridge to help people. So that's why the modern classroom, I'm hopeful on the modern classroom, because it's going to be an amazing experience, and hopefully it'll alleviate a lot of the pain and frustration people are feeling today.
Well, that was Cy Naik with the Mavin project, and what they're proposing right now is this concept that you can better assess by really upending standardized testing and using more of a technologically savvy model where teachers work as facilitators. So we're back here with Lance Werner from Kent District Library. Lance, I really took away from what Cy was talking about as, hey, this bubble has just come in that COVID kind of introduced to us, right, where there is a laptop in every kid's hands with a video camera. Absolutely. So how do we work AI, artificial intelligence, into a model in which that camera can actually do the project building for a student? That student can then work through that laptop and have this facilitator and coach and a teacher that now is taking time helping that kid master some of the tasks that, again, are driven by the workforce and what the workforce needs are.
Right. I think that it's an extremely important move. I think that this whole traditional sort of standardized testing, standardized instruction model is really kind of going out the window. I kind of like, at this point, hearing what he had to say, it almost makes me feel like he understands that, when we're talking about kids that are in school, when we're putting them through the program, when they're engaging in these activities, it's almost like an internship that starts when you're in kindergarten, because it's kind of work-based and it kind of goes through their entire, educational career, but it starts young. And so we're meeting them again on their own terms, and we're being flexible and dynamic. My kids, actually, two of my kids at my house go to school virtually now. And they have a very sort of customized instruction. For instance, my daughter really likes Japanese, and it's very hard to get a Japanese class, but here she's learning Japanese, and it's because she wants to live in Japan. She wants to be a coder and live in Japan, and she's able to do that because of this personalized instruction that we're getting remotely. So I think that it's a great idea. I think that it's kind of something that's going to be important in the future, and I hope to see more of it.
Yeah, and it gets back to what Dan Beam from Forest Hills Public Schools was talking about earlier, where there's this iTunification, there's this playlist that's a little bit more customized. This is putting, I think, more of the child's capabilities assessed through a myriad of different channels, like where they're understanding what the student is capable of on a number of different wavelengths. But it's putting them and maybe the parents more in the driver's seat of, hey, this is where my kid is going to bring value. And he's not going to fall through the cracks because we're identifying it.
Yeah, absolutely. It's so important. And it's really important for the kids' self-esteem, too. I mean, it's important that the kids are successful. And, I mean, they're going to be strong in some areas and not so strong in other areas. And anything we can do to build them up is critical. So I think it's wonderful.
Yeah, and I think what a lot of viewers saw when they watched Cy really wrapped around this fail-fast mentality. It's a very entrepreneurial kind of style, but it works so well because in business, in the real world, Dan was talking about the same thing. In the real world, you got to be willing to take chances and risks and go in different directions before you find the route. The assumption that we know everything right on the first try and get it right is totally out the window at this point.
Yeah, it's ridiculous. Yeah. It truly is. And I really just, I feel so heartened, about the dynamic environment that, is kind of coming out of COVID. And it wasn't something that I actually expected. So it's really inspirational.
Yes, Cy said something that I found a lot of value in because he talks about a system that depreciates value over time, where these students really should appreciate in value. And so if they get it wrong on a test, you should be able to fix that error because that's how you're going to master it. And everybody that we talked to, was talking about skills mastery. We had Dan talking about Cub Scouts and the mastery and getting the badges. And later on, you're going to see in the part 2 of this, You're going to see homeschool parents talking about skill mastery. You're going to see parochial schools talking about skill mastery. You're going to see Holly Goulet, who we have from Kent District Library, come on. She talks about how the library system can wrap around mastering skills. But Cy nailed it with this idea that these students depreciate over time, where it almost is like the child ends up losing value, and the ones that are able to do that intellectual obstacle course get all the value and opportunity.
Oh, absolutely. And I think really in kind of the traditional environment, what happens is the erosion that you see is kind of an erosion of interest too. And that's why, if you recall what Dan said, we're talking to the high school students. What's high school? Boring. It's boring, right? It's the erosion of interest. But if we're able to provide them a kind of a customized experience and let them succeed and let them feel good, we can really change a lot of lives. What's important too is that, I think standardized testing, frankly, is kind of a lazy way to do things, because it's really easy to administer, but it doesn't really capture the whole, the whole story. And I think that, it kind of concerns me. I wonder how many kids have been disenfranchised because they haven't had that sort of customized experience. And how many talented people have we kind of brushed off that were capable of a lot more, but they just didn't make it through because they didn't have the level of instruction that they needed to be successful.
Yeah, and any culture in the world is going to understand this, because when you can't speak the language, so we have immigrants coming over here and their kids know 2 languages, but when that parent can't speak the language, the natural assumption that many of us fall into the trap is that the person that across from us isn't smart.
Right.
Well, that's not it at all.
No, it's not
that. It's just the ability to relay that to the teacher or the other person or the employer. And the unique thing about what Cy and the Mavin project and this software is doing is it eliminates that barrier, because these videos that you're working through and these skills assessment that you're doing with more of an online and technologically savvy route, it's going to do it in your native language if you need it to. Yeah, so you have this great ability.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And I think it's so important to reach people where they're at. One of the things at the Kent District Library is that we believe convenience is everything. It's the most important thing, and that's why Amazon and all these other online platforms have been successful. And so we try to tailor our service to make it as convenient as possible. And so if we're able to make education convenient and dynamic, intuitive for students, they're going to be successful.
Yeah, and for teachers that might be watching this, or everybody knows a teacher, but that is at the heart of this too. Cy talks about the burden that teachers are taking on. They're overworked, they're underpaid, we all know that.
Yep.
But there's a component to this that almost everybody we talked to got into as well, which is this kind of social emotional dynamic. And the Mavin project is bringing that variable into play, where you might have a social emotional situation because your upbringing, or maybe you miss lunch. So now you're not all the synapses are firing right. It's taking all these variables into play, and that helps the teacher understand what this child needs. And I mean, how wild is this really, that your teachers right now, they're rewarded based on these same standardized assessment tests.
It's insane.
Yeah.
It really is insane. And you're right about the whole emotional thing. I think traditionally, for whatever reason, emotions were kind of neglected. There wasn't a lot of attention paid to what was going on in the background, where kids were at on a particular day, and it really made me feel good that there is a recognition of that now, because I really feel like it's going to make the students and in the families, in the businesses, and society better by recognizing that. The mushy stuff matters, and it matters more than you think, always.
That's right, and he did a wonderful job, and we really appreciate that. That was an exclusive interview that we got with Cy Naik from the Mavin project, so we're really happy about that. So that's it for episode 1. We want you to come back for part 2 to the modern classroom, because it's really important that you start to see some other options, particularly if you're a parent out there, because we're going to be talking to homeschoolers. Homeschooling has changed tremendously over the last 20, 30 years, and we're here in Grand Rapids, Michigan, where homeschooling actually is a pretty big thing. But in the last couple of years, it has changed so much. And Lance, you have to have seen it at times in the library.
Oh, absolutely. The library is a great partner to homeschoolers. We have a lot of homeschoolers that rely on the library for materials. They use the space, and we're here for everybody. The Kent District Library exists to further all people. We love our homeschoolers. We love everybody, and yeah, the dynamic is just moving so fast right now.
Yeah, so once again, thanks to Lance Werner, thanks for Kent District Library for sponsoring these episodes too, and we hope you'll join us for part 2. Thanks for being with us.